Congressman Babin, who is the chair of the Space Subcommittee for Science and Technology. I didn't know this when I started looking at his bio, but Congressman Babin was also an Air Force officer back early in his career. Now, before you get too excited, he was a dentist, which means nobody in the Air Force actually ever wanted to go see him in the Air Force. But he was there, and actually we overlapped in our career by about 3 years. So hopefully my teeth never saw his hands. He was elected to Congress and began serving in 2015 in Congress. He serves, as I already said, on the House Science, Space Technology Committee and chairman of the Subcommittee on Space. I actually had the privilege of appearing before that committee just several months ago as he and his committee began the work to create the American Space Commerce Enterprise Act, which has now been introduced by the full committee. And I think I'm sure you've all read it, and it's got some fantastic things in there to really free innovation within American space. Congressman Babin, welcome this morning, and please.
Thank you very much, Doug. I really appreciate that. People ask me what I did in the Air Force. Can everybody hear me okay?
You should give him that mic.
All right, we'll give him this mic. There you go, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm a little too tall. I shouldn't have worn my boots, but I'm from Texas, sorry. I did fly a dental chair for several years in the Air Force, and but also have prior service in the Army as well. I was an enlisted man, an artilleryman, and went to jump school, and then went back and finished my education. It's great to be here. It was wonderful to hear the secretary speak about from her perspective as one of us, Doug, as a member of Congress and also a former Air Force officer herself. She's got a great resume. And I was out at the game last night too. The score was not real good for the Republicans, but I think we made a good showing, and I enjoyed it. It was the most packed house I've seen in any of our baseball games so far. But it's real good to be here with you folks this morning and to be talking about military matters. A lot of people out there don't quite understand that a strong and robust space program is without doubt a force multiplier for our DOD and our military folks on the ground. So it runs hand in hand. But I want to thank you for inviting me this morning. I really appreciate your kind invitation to sit alongside, I assume Jim Bridenstine's on his way. Anyway, great to be here. I'd like to use this opportunity to discuss the private sector industrial base and its relationship to both civil and military space activities. All of us know about the dual use nature of space, but let us start by taking a step back and look at the general relationship between private sector, military, and civil space activities. When it comes to the use of space, commercial, civilian, and military planners face very similar scientific, technological, and engineering challenges. Physics, biology, and chemistry don't care if your spacecraft has an Air Force, a NASA, or a corporate logo on the side. Exploration and expeditionary warfare share many similarities. Most notably, both attempt to expand U.S. influence into an uncooperative and hostile environment. Pushing into a hostile unknown is a technological, logistical, and operational challenge, as everyone in this room knows. Whether it's Captain Meriwether Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark opening up the American West as part of the Corps of Discovery and Expedition of the Lewis and Clark expedition, or the enormous U.S. Antarctic expeditions under Operation Deep Freeze led by Admiral Byrd, there's always been a connection between exploration and national security. Long before the first shot is fired or the first sample is collected, planners must confront the operational challenges a long way from home. As humans push out into low Earth orbit and beyond, they will carry with them their values and their cultural institutions. And I, for one, want to ensure that those on the frontier of space are Americans. In order to make this a reality, we have to make the U.S. an attractive place to do business. And we can do this by keeping the regulatory burden low, ensuring that property rights are guaranteed, offering an attractive tax structure, and ensuring that the rule of law is upheld. Companies can choose to incorporate, manufacture, and operate from many countries. They have freedom of choice. If we fail in any of these efforts, I fear that we may be relegated to just a contributing role. And this would compromise our national security, our economic competitiveness, and our leadership role in the international community. If we're vigilant in our efforts to uphold the principles that I just mentioned, I'm very confident that the United States will enjoy a very healthy private sector in space and play a leadership role on the frontiers of space. So why is a healthy private sector so important in space? Because a healthy private sector in space serves both national security and civil space purposes. A launch vehicle is an intercontinental ballistic missile. Earth science missions or reconnaissance satellites. The same capabilities necessary to conduct rendezvous and proximity operations are necessary to intercept a missile. One of the greatest success stories related to the intersection of the national security, civil, and commercial space sectors is GPS, our global positioning system. Initially designed to fulfill a national security purpose, the position, navigation, and timing system has unarguably had a monumental impact on our society, and not just in America, as you know. The commercial applications are ubiquitous today. From navigation systems in our cars and phones to banking and financial transactions, the capability provided by the national security sector was picked up by the private sector, which has in turn developed capabilities beyond everyone's wildest dreams. The civil space community has been just as impacted. GPS now provides weather products through a process known as radio occultation, providing early warning capabilities for tsunamis, earthquakes, and continues to unlock the mysteries of the universe by allowing for scientific experiments such as Gravity Probe B. GPS synergy is also evident in the fact that the civil space sector provided the basic research that allowed the national security community to develop an operational system in the first place. Similarly, the commercial space sector continues to develop GPS products for the national security space community. Much like GPS, the launch community also benefits from synergies between the sectors. For decades, launch vehicles developed for the national security community, and often in partnership with the private sector, have launched astronauts into space, placed scientific satellites in orbit, and transported payloads to the edges of our solar system. The civil space community's use of national security launch vehicles leads to not only increases in reliability, but also cost savings as a result of economies of scale. And let's also not forget that the rockets used by both the national security and civil space sector are built by the private sector, and many through public-private partnerships. The commercial sector benefited from not only government development funding, but also a steady customer. And while the national security community may not see a connection to civil space programs like the ISS, the impacts to the launch market from retiring the ISS and the launch demand that it provides will surely be felt at the Pentagon and in corporate boardrooms, without question. Similarly, the satellite servicing programs at NASA, DARPA, and in the private sector are also very intertwined. Efforts to develop capabilities to robotically service NASA satellites, like Hubble and Landsat, create capabilities that can be used to extend the life of national security payloads. DARPA's efforts to establish standards for satellite servicing operations will inform commercial activities. Companies like MDA and Orbital ATK stand ready to provide their services not only to the U.S. government, but also satellite communications companies. Leveraging market forces will hopefully decrease costs across the board. Space situational awareness is another area where there is considerable synergy between national security, civil, and commercial space sectors. The Department of Defense operates the Joint Space Operations Center, or JSPOC, which tracks objects in space. And over the years, they have taken on the collateral duty of notifying private sector operators of potential conjunctions. As a trained dentist, it took me a little while to figure out what a conjunction was after I got on got on this committee. I was always worried about my kids driving their cars and having conjunctions. But now I know that it is a serious, serious problem in space and a growing problem. NASA plays a significant role in this process as well. The Johnson Space Center, which I represent in Houston, has expertise in tracking space objects to ensure the safety of human spaceflight operations. Similarly, the Goddard Space Flight Center has similar responsibilities to protect science missions in orbit. I had the great privilege of going out to Goddard just last week and seeing some of their operations and research. Wonderful place. The private sector is also providing innovative and flexible solutions as well. The Space Data Association, a non-governmental entity comprised of operators, is leading the way on coordinating and deconflicting operations in geostationary orbit. Commercial providers like AGI, ExoAnalytics, and Leo Labs are standing up commercial solutions to augment, in many cases supplant, existing catalogs. In the future, space situational awareness solutions will be derived from a mix of national security, civil, and private sector solutions. Commercial remote sensing is particularly important lately. Innovative U.S. companies stand ready to ensure American leadership in this field if the government would offer a stable and predictable environment. Regulatory reform would strengthen national security by inviting companies to locate here in the United States. As I said, they're free to go wherever they want to, and we have to make it attractive. And they would bring jobs, innovation, and capital back home to the United States. It would also ensure that the United States understands the capabilities and operations of these innovative systems and is prepared to adapt their tactics, techniques, and procedures to the latest technological breakthroughs. Furthermore, warfighters can actually share commercial remote sensing data with allies and coalition partners much more readily than information derived from traditional systems. Using commercial remote sensing data to augment capabilities is also more cost-effective. And on the civil side, weather forecasting, agricultural monitoring, and disaster relief also depend heavily on private sector remote sensing capabilities. For years, companies have been pushed offshore by a burdensome, opaque, and arbitrary regulatory process. And our national security and economic competitiveness would be well served by better coordination between military, civil, and private sector remote sensing activities. This coordination would inevitably have a positive budget impact, and I would greatly like to see this happen. Although the close relationship between civil, commercial, and military space sectors holds a lot of promise, a fair assessment should also recognize the challenges. We must carefully guard against subjecting our national security to the uncertainty of markets. Companies come and go, and civil space priorities change with each administration. We must ensure that any cooperation between the space sectors does not lead to a dependence or a monopoly that could undermine our national security posture. DoD dependence on the space shuttle in the 1980s led to complications, and after the Challenger disaster, and a rush to develop alternative capabilities to assure access to space. The National Polar Orbiting Environmental Satellite System merged weather programs from NOAA and the Air Force, only to result in a failed program that compromised our nation's civil and military weather forecasting. Right now, we're evaluating the impact of decreased demand and growing prices for ammonium perchlorate, the fuel used for solid rocket motors. The cancellation of the Space Shuttle program, the largest user of ammonium perchlorate, has had a direct impact on national security programs like the Navy's Trident missile system and program and the Air Force's Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent program. The development of the Space Launch System, or SLS, may stabilize the market in the future, but considerations about whether advanced boosters for the SLS will use solid or liquid fuel will inevitably raise additional concerns about ammonium perchlorate availability and pricing. And aside from ammonium perchlorate issues, it's also worth noting that the SLS might also pose a significant benefit to our national security community by offering a capability to lift significantly larger payloads, wider fairings, and much more volume. And I'd like to now turn to the American Space Commerce Free Enterprise Act, which just passed out of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee last week. This bill touches on important areas where civil, commercial, and military uses of space coverage. The bill addresses long-standing concerns with the current regulatory process for commercial remote sensing. And by fixing the broken regulatory process, we will streamline applications, stimulate innovation, and still allow for the conditioning of activities if they affect national security. The bill will keep companies from going overseas. It will strengthen our national security and give our national security community much more insight into evolving capabilities and making it known that the U.S. is open for business. The legislation also seeks to assure our compliance with our outer space treaty obligations. And while the U.S. is currently in compliance with its Article 6 responsibilities to authorize and supervise the activities of non-government actors in space, the bill seeks to clear up any misperceptions about this and make it abundantly clear that we are complying with our obligations. The bill accomplishes this in the least burdensome way possible and without compromising our cherished principles of liberty that we as Americans are so proud of. It provides for presumptions of approval and requires the government to take affirmative steps before conditioning or denying proposed space or remote sensing operations. It places the burden of demonstrating inconsistency with outer space treaty obligations and national security requirements of the United States with the government and not with the applicant. It curtails vague, overreaching regulatory authority and prevents tolling of statutory adjudication timelines. It ensures the U.S. industry receives a timely and transparent determination on applications. And more importantly, it will ensure that the U.S. remains a leader in space commerce, which will definitely strengthen our national security, leverage private sector investment, and lessen budget pressures. The legislation still provides for critical expertise, insight, and input from both the State Department and the national security community. Interagency consultation is an inherent power of any part of the executive branch. The legislation would make several changes. Approval would no longer be denied without reason. No agency would have the ability to deny an application just by stony silence. And there would be a single point of authority for decisions instead of multiple points. The bill places this authority in the Secretary of Commerce because the Secretary of Commerce already has a regulatory process in place to handle commercial remote sensing, which is the only process that currently exists for regulating activities in space. By merging the DOC Office of Space Commerce and the NOAA Office of Commercial Space Sensing Regulatory Affairs, reforming an existing broken process and minimizing the burden on other agencies, placing the authority of DOC would result in less bureaucracy and better efficiency. It's as close to a one-stop shop as you can find. Turning now to the recent budget request. Space clearly received very favorable consideration and treatment. Of all the non-defense, non-security agencies in the federal government, I believe that NASA received the most favorable proposed budget. And having spent time with Vice President Pence last week, all day, as a matter of fact, going down into my district at the Johnson Space Center, meeting our 12 new astronauts, I can tell you that this administration is tuned in to the importance of our space program as related to our defense. I think an important reason NASA has done well under this budget is that while technically a non-defense agency, NASA is undoubtedly, as I just said, a strategic agency with a direct role in U.S. interests. It's important to note that this NASA budget also covers aeronautics research and development, NASA's fundamental research on hypersonics, which I've had several very interesting briefings on over the last 2 weeks, and unmanned systems complement national security efforts. All of the issues that I have just discussed will benefit from the attention, coordination, and leadership of the National Space Council. I was honored to travel, as I said, to the Johnson Space Center. The Vice President has indicated on several occasions his intent to reconstitute the National Space Council and be its first chair. If appropriately reconstituted and granted the necessary authorities to conduct its duties, the Council could serve as a valuable resource to coordinate many of the issues and activities that span the commercial, civil, and national security space sectors. This means that they will need to negotiate authorities with the National Security Council, the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, just to name a few, with the understanding that the National Space Council will take the lead on space issues. The administration could effectively coordinate activities across the sectors and not just become another layer of bureaucracy. I look forward to working with the administration to make the council a very effective body. And I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss national security space issues in connection to both the civil space and private sector space communities. And I want to say God bless you, our space program, and God bless America. Thank you very, very much.